Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to the 2009 Historic Preservation Awards. This is, we believe, our 18th annual time, and it's probably one of the highlights for the Historic Preservation Commission. It's really fun to recognize this fabulous work that the community has done and some of the great preservation work that's happening around our town. So we're going to honor some great stuff today. We've got a featured speaker. We wanted to get through a little bit and just kind of remind you guys, in case you don't already know, a little bit about the Historic Preservation Commission, who we are, what we do, why we're here. Philip put some nice shots of Missoula in, giving a sense of Missoula in 1880 and then now. Some of the stuff that we're trying to preserve, some of the things, the landscapes, the viewscapes, the buildings, the architecture, all the elements of this town that make Missoula, Missoula, all the things that make it this wonderful, unique space, and the ways we're going to try and preserve it and hold on to this heritage. The Missoula Historic Preservation Commission is a voluntary board. We get paid fabulously for this. I even had to tip for my own drink tonight, so, but that's okay. We're a volunteer board. It's comprised of 3 professional members. We have most of them here, I think. Can our professional members stand up? Jim, Steve was here. They're hiding from us. Steve's in back. We have 6 neighborhood members. If any of our neighborhood members are here, please stand up. They represent a variety of neighborhoods across. Thank you. And then we have a representative from the Design Review Board, which I believe is Tracy. There she is back there. And then a Missoula Redevelopment Agency appointee. We also have one at-large member, that's me, which means I can live anywhere I want and still be part of it, which is fun. And then we have 2 alternate members. So if we are short of members, they come to all the meetings, they're part of us all the time, but if we're short on members, they get to step in and do all the voting and all the fun stuff. And if they can stand, if they're here, Scott. We meet the first Thursday of every month. A couple hours. It's pretty fun and exciting stuff. The main things we've been working on this year is just, along with the Preservation Award, is working on a number of items to try and make preservation more prominent in the community, ways to incorporate into all the elements of business so that we can do all the things that we're charged with. Promoting and preserving historic and prehistoric sites, structures, objects, building, landscapes, and districts. We address historic preservation issues. We integrate them into the planning. And my favorite part, finding, identifying, tracking all the old buildings and bringing them to light. We have a number of historic districts. You may live in a few. Unfortunately, I'm down here. So. That's the drawback of being at large. What gets people on the National Register of Historic Places is they need to qualify under historic events, historic people, design, or the potential for archaeology. So we're going to look at any of these sites. If we're going to go out, find something that has great potential or has a fabulous designer or architect or broad patterns of history, any of these things that just are crucial to what makes our history stand prominent. And it can be put up on the National Register of Historic Places. It can be deemed eligible, and it can receive plaques and all the fun stuff. We address neighborhoods, homes, individual places, and the downtown. Look at large commercial buildings, small buildings, outbuildings, whatever it is. Anything that's fabulous, we'll look at it, consider it, and try and incorporate it into our time. So now I would love to introduce our guest speaker for the night. Jane Powell is a restoration consultant, a preservationist, house restorer, lecturer. She's the author of 6 different books, many of which are back there. Books on bungalows, linoleum. She's a hands-on restorer. She has bought 10 vintage homes, brought them back to life. She continues to restore her own home in 1905, Craftsman Bungalow. She's written for numerous magazines, and she's known as the bad girl of bungalow writing. Please welcome Jane Powell. We're very honored to have her. It's all yours.
Okay.
Do you want this down a little bit?
Yeah. Short people, you know.
Sorry about that. I wore my boots.
Hey, I wore mine too, but it didn't help. Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Let's go to the first slide. Trying to answer the question, what is a bungalow, is rather like trying to answer a Zen koan, a riddle with no apparent answer. The most famous Zen koan, of course, is what is the sound of one hand clapping? But I prefer this one. The library assistant approached the Zen librarian with a question. I can't find thinking outside the box. It's not on the shelf and not checked out. The Zen librarian replied, if you can't find the box, think outside the chicken. The idea of the koan is that the Zen student will, in a moment of sudden understanding, attain satori, or enlightenment. And in the same way, I'm hoping that during this talk, you will attain bungalow satori, in which it will all make perfect sense that a temporary hut from India was transformed in California into an iconic and original house form based on a socialist design movement originating in 19th century Britain. Or at least you'll be able to recognize a bungalow when you see one. This, by the way, is a bungalow. Pretty typical. This is in Seattle. 2 gables, lots of stone, lots of shingles, very woody, exposed structure, all the things that bungalows are supposed to have. Bungalows did not go straight from being a temporary bamboo and thatch hut in Bengal to being a widespread architectural representation of the arts and crafts movement in America. Instead, the original hut was transformed over time and through various filters and interpretations to become the bungalow that we know here. Rather like the original whispered message in the party game of telephone, which ends up at the end bearing only a vague resemblance to the original sentence. So here are the original bungalows in India. They were called bangolos, which basically meant a house in Bengal, and you can see they were thatched. And this, of course, was very quickly anglicized to bungalow by the British. And the British, as they colonized India, made a few modifications to these to, make them more British-friendly, shall we say, and had them built all over India and the rest of their empire. Which I believe, yes. So here is your British-style bungalow. This one is in Indonesia. I think it's from about 1909. The British one, hipped roof, often thatched, although later on they went to tile. Porch on either 3 or all 4 sides, usually raised up off the ground for better ventilation, or else built up on a plinth. So these were built, wherever Britain had colonies. And in the mid-19th century, accounts about life in bungalows began to filter back to England. And as a country that was beginning to feel both the good and bad effects of the Industrial Revolution, the bungalow and the life lived in it seemed very exotic and romantic. And for the upper-class British, at least, living far from the crowding, pollution, class struggle, and complexity of the cities, in a simple house surrounded by a garden, a lavish garden at that, seemed like a very fine thing. The first bungalows to be built in Britain itself were constructed in seaside resort towns in the late 19th century, starting about 1869. And these actually resembled the later American bungalows far more than the later British bungalows did, because if you say bungalow to somebody from Britain, they think nasty post-war tract house. They don't think, lovely, romantic, simple home, because most bungalows in Britain were actually built after World War I and World War II. But here's one of the early ones from 1869. You can see that it has some of the things we've come to expect: overhanging eaves, held up by knee braces, lots of windows, low sloping roof. Lost my place. Yeah. Actually, I'm going to move this up here where I can maybe see it better. See, I just need a bigger podium. Nostalgia for the countryside cottages of pre-industrial Britain was already widespread amongst the upper classes, and so the bungalow was like a cottage, and yet it was exotic and foreign as well. But there would be no bungalows in America without the British arts and crafts movement, a reaction against shoddy mass-produced goods, overwrought decorating, and the appalling social conditions brought on by industrialization. This. Because for the first time, middle-class people could buy stuff. Lots and lots of stuff. So they did. They got a little carried away, and they covered every available surface in their rooms with, and some of this stuff, you know, taken individually is quite nice, but altogether it's a bit overwhelming. So the mission of the arts and crafts reformers was fairly complex. They wanted to educate the public and reshape popular taste. They wanted to reform the means of production and consumption, and by this to change the structure of society. Yeah, piece of cake. This is more what they had in mind. This is William Morris Red House, designed for him and in the countryside just outside of London, and you have no idea how radical this was at the time. This was like so spare, so modern that, you know, the Victorians hardly knew what to do with it. Unfortunately for the British arts and crafts movement, their devotion to handcraft made the wares prohibitively expensive and affordable only to the rich, which was not part of their deal. They were trying to bring up the common man as well. And the British movement did not really embrace the bungalow, looking backward instead to medieval prototypes. It was not until the bungalow was exported to North America that it became the architectural symbol of the American arts and crafts movement. Because we, having no medieval tradition to look back to, opted to celebrate simplicity, natural materials, and honesty of structure. Here's an interior of a house in Seattle. Got your William Morris wallpaper, your unpainted woodwork, your colonnade between rooms, flow between rooms. They were kind of opening up the box. Now, of course, much of the honesty of structure was actually fake. But this hypocritical aspect in no way diminishes the beauty of both the objects and the houses. In fact, it was probably what allowed the movement to succeed and allowed the middle and working classes for the first time to own houses that were both economical, artistic, and practical. So on this bungalow in Milwaukee, you'll see they have many brackets which look like they are piercing this barge board or fascia board, where they then have, yes, fake pegged through tenons, because through tenons were a very big thing on the furniture. That proved that, you know, you could see exactly how the furniture was put together, and theoretically you could even take it apart if you wanted to by removing the peg from the through tenon and taking the whole thing apart. On houses, however, the structure was often fake. The other thing I want to say about this house, don't paint your house white. Just don't. Bungalows weren't meant to be white. But there was more to the movement than that. They actually believed that design could change people's lives. They believed that people living in these houses, having these objects, raising their children there, would result in a wholesome life, upstanding citizens, and a peaceful and prosperous country. So it was maybe a little more complicated than that, but, you know, you got to have a dream. The first house to actually be called a bungalow to be built in America was built on Cape Cod in 1879. was not really a bungalow, but the term at that time was being used to refer to all sorts of vacation homes. You can see that it has some bungalow characteristics. Got lots of exposed structure everywhere. It's got the wraparound porch. It is, of course, 2.5 stories high, which means it really does not qualify as a bungalow. And it has these really excellent shark fins on the ridges. But it was in California that the bungalow reached its full potential in a fascinating confluence of myth, capitalism, mass migration, high art, and popular taste. In California, the arts and crafts philosophy combined with democratic ideals and a typically American practicality finally accomplished at least part of what the British founders had hoped for: artistic homes for nearly everyone. And this is a bungalow plan from a 1923 magazine called The Home, which it says right there. It's what we would call a pop top or an airplane bungalow. The pop top, they thought, resembled a cockpit as they were on the airplanes of the time. And boy, is this thing timber happy. There's just structure everywhere you look. There's brackets holding up the window boxes. There's rafter tail cutouts. There's a pergola on the side. There's this lovely cloud rift in the railing. And then here on the corner, we have a neoclassical urn. Who knows what that's about? Probably this would not have happened in California except for 2 things. The first was the gold rush of 1849, which brought 500,000 new people to the state in search of wealth, and the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, which made it easier to get there. The railroad changed the cross-country trip from a few months to a few days, allowing people to emigrate to California and allowing wealthy Easterners to vacation there in the winter, which led to things like this. Roses in midwinter, Southern California. There were numerous postcards and advertisements and everything else. Now, I can tell you as a Californian that although roses do bloom in midwinter, really not this profusely. A lot of these were kind of doctored up. And of course, the railroads encouraged this sort of thing, and many books and periodicals and magazines, just were waxing rhapsodic about the mild winters and the year-round flowers and the healthful air to be found in California, because these people were still very concerned about tuberculosis, which they still thought was caused by bad air. The first arts and crafts house built in California is generally agreed to be the house of Joseph Worcester, built in 1876 in Piedmont, California, across the bay from San Francisco, a town now totally surrounded by my hometown of Oakland. He was a Swedenborgian minister who designed his own house, which was rustic and reflected his ideals of harmony with nature. He was also instrumental in the arts and crafts movement in Northern California, both as a designer, as a client, as a mentor, and an associate of architects like Bernard Maybeck, Willis Polk, Ernest Coxhead, and others, as well as artists like William Keith and Bruce Porter, naturalist John Muir, and writer Charles Keeler. And unfortunately, although this house is still there in Piedmont, it has been remodeled beyond recognition. And you will note, 1876 was actually 3 years earlier than the bungalow on Cape Cod. So, we win. Little California pride there, what can I say? Meanwhile, in Southern California, architects like Charles and Henry Green, the brothers Arthur and Alfred Heinemann, Louis B. Easton, Irving Gill, and Myron Hunt, Elmer Gray were experimenting with a similar rustic style. No one really knows what caused bungalows to start being built in California. It's kind of like when you're making popcorn. First, nothing happens, then one kernel pops, then another, and then soon they're all stopping, they're all popping at once. And that's kind of what happened. You know, a few bungalows were built, and after 1900, there was just an explosion. Certainly, the mild climate, inexpensive lumber, cheap land, demand for housing, and of course, the ever-present lust for profit probably had an effect. But there was also something special about California, partly myth, partly reality. It's always been the promised land. It was still the frontier. People came to California to have different lives than they could have elsewhere. There was a certain optimism and willingness to try new things, and bungalows were the new thing, and they seemed to fit somehow. And by the turn of the 20th century, the bungalow boom in California had begun. And so this is a pretty much quintessential, what came to be called a California bungalow, pretty much worldwide. Twin gables, big porch, big honking pillars, exposed structure, exposed rafter tails, prominent chimney, three-part front window, really typical floor plan, living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom, bath, bedroom. Can't tell you how many bungalows I've been in that have that same floor plan. This is also a bungalow, barely. This is the Lanterman House in La Cañada Flint Ridge near Pasadena. It's 11,000 square feet, but it's still a bungalow because it's only 1.5 stories. Interestingly enough, it's very craftsman on the outside. It's very colonial revival on the inside, which actually happened more than you might think. And although many bungalows were designed by known architects, the great majority of them weren't. The simplicity of the style lent itself to endless variations of the basic elements, and soon tracts of bungalows were being thrown up by individual builders, building companies, and land speculators. And plan books, already a fixture since the 19th century, had begun to feature bungalows. And here we have one from the Lewis Company. This is about 1925. This is called the La Vitello. And it has all the hallmarks of a craftsman bungalow. Got stone, exposed structure, prominent chimney, got these wonderful, what are called battered trim boards. Battered means, you know, it's wider at the bottom. It had never occurred to me, I've seen lots of these, and then somebody I knew actually put them on his house. And they're actually very hard to do because for every size window, it's a different angle. They have a lovely little side porch with a pergola. So this really came to represent the craftsman-type bungalow, which is very kind of rustic, woody, lots of stone and clinker brick and kind of natural materials. And because of the plan books and soon the ready-cut house companies like Aladdin and Sears and everybody else, the bungalow idea was brought to the rest of the country. So soon the California bungalows were being altered to fit other climates with steeper roofs, enclosed porches, actual basements, brick walls instead of wood siding, etc. So almost any town that saw growth in the early 20th century will probably have bungalows. This is I believe this is an Aladdin bungalow, the Winthrop from 1917. It cost $996.55. Was described as being of the pure bungalow type. Low, a touch of rough stones, bracketed eave supports, heavy timber work, shingles, and broken outlines. Now, obviously, pre-cut buildings were totally at odds with the arts and crafts ideal of hand craftsmanship. But the companies were actually touting their machinery, explaining how it could cut lumber more economically with less waste, etc. And it was this practicality and willingness to use machinery that allowed not only the houses, but also many of the decorative objects associated with the movement to be affordable to working people. Here's a bungalow by an architect in Memphis. The architect was Mahan and Broadwell, 1922. In Memphis, everything is brick and Indiana limestone and tile roofs. What I find interesting about this is not only do they have the big square pillars, but apparently that wasn't enough. No, there had to be two little kind of rope columns in addition to the pillars. And this very strange gable ornament. I have, there's abstraction in bungalows, but some of the abstraction, you're just like, what is it? Here's another bungalow in Memphis. Again, the red brick with the limestone, a lot of half timbering in the gables, which, I note from driving around this afternoon is pretty much what you have here. Pretty much what they have in a lot of places, actually. It depended a lot, there was a lot of emphasis on local materials, so it depended on what your local materials were, whether there was stone, whether there was a lot of timber, whether there was brick, and also it depended on who your immigrants were, and whether they came from a wood building tradition or a masonry building tradition. The real heyday of bungalows lasted from the turn of the century about till the end of World War I, and pretty much corresponded to how long the arts and crafts movement lasted in America. They did continue to be built after the war, but in a much simplified style, and the growing appeal of the various romantic revival styles cut into their popularity. But they continued to be built well into the 1930s, although by then they were no longer trendy. So here's probably a 20s bungalow somewhere on the Jersey Shore. I thought this was interesting because usually when you have a round thing, you have a round thing on top of it, but no, these have a regular square gable. But you can see it's a lot simpler than some of the Craftsman one. There's just little tiny cutout here. The eaves have been boxed in. It's all stucco. It's been simplified. By the way, this local stone is called Wissahickon schist. And then you got the sort of crossover after World War I, where you get some kind of English, Tudor romantic revival, and yet it's still kind of a bungalow like this one in Denver. And then, thanks to Frank Lloyd Wright and his compatriots in Chicago, you also get prairie-style bungalows. And prairie-style houses seem to be the most modern-looking to us even now. This is one in Memphis, which was designed by an architect who had worked in Frank Lloyd Wright's office in Oak Park, but then spent a few years in Memphis at the beginning of the 20th century and designed a bunch of prairie-style buildings there, and then went back to Oak Park. And I've got to say, these are some of the biggest overhangs I have ever seen on anything. It's an unfortunate paint color choice, but what can you do? It's generally agreed that arts and crafts movement planted the seeds of modernism, or at least prepared the soil. It's also generally agreed that the bungalow led to the ranch house. But something that I perceive to be a terrible thing, and a thing which troubles us still, happened during this process. Beauty was removed from the equation. Louis Sullivan's form follows function creed was perverted from its original meaning, and businesses realized that a lack of ornament was also cheaper, which has led to a whole lot of faceless stucco boxes. Bungalows, on the other hand, are not faceless. For instance, they have this very fine form of masonry which combines clinker bricks and river stones and is appropriately enough called peanut brittle. This is in Denver, and this also has these interesting little tassel-like gable ornaments, which I like very much. The majority of bungalows do offer their best face to the street. They're oriented towards the front, big front porch, because hard as it is to believe, people actually used to sit on the front porch and talk to their neighbors. Now I'll take a brief tour of the inside of some bungalows. The living room, the biggest, the most important room, usually the largest, even in a tiny little bungalow, often open to the dining room, the two being separated only by, a wide doorway or colonnade, which allows each room to, as they say, borrow space from the other. Family life was to be centered here around the hearth, which assumed an almost religious significance embodied in the phrase hearth and home. And the classic bungalow fireplace is flanked by high windows and bookcases, although in this case there's only a bookcase on one side because there's a door on the other side, and so there's just paneling. Here's another lovely fireplace, faced in lovely green tile. I don't know if it's Groovy or not. Apparently, the owners, when they bought this, had to strip off red paint, which had been put both on the woodwork and the tile by a previous owner. And in Memphis, the woodwork is all made of tupelo, or red gum, which was a local hardwood. And woodwork left in a natural finish was also a defining feature of bungalows. Woodwork was second only to the fireplace in its quasi-religious significance, because it was, after all, made up entirely of old-growth timber, but it was also part of the blurring of inside and outside that was very much prized by arts and crafts designers. Here is the living room of a Julia Morgan bungalow in Berkeley. It's all redwood. You can see that the ceiling structure has actually been exposed. And you can't see it very well on the slide, but this house actually still has the original linen wall covering, which is extremely rare. But sometimes the woodwork did get painted because that was the owner's preference, or of course it got painted later when everyone was trying to modernize. And you can work with that, and people do, as these people have done in this Chicago bungalow. In many bungalows, there would be a small room off to one side that was either set up as a study or den, or with a not so obvious function, so you could use it as a guest room, a nursery, a sewing music room, whatever. This one has actually been set up as an office by my friend Wanda. And on the desk, the desk this is a tribute to her mother, who was a journalist in Chicago. And so these are all things that belong to her mother. That's a picture of her mother in the typewriter. That is the typewriter that her mother used. So it's a little shrine. This bungalow in Milwaukee, you came in, it had sort of, in cold climates, you often have the kind of airlock. It's like you have a door, you have the airlock, then you have the front door, then you go in. And in this particular one, the room you went into was this, which they had set up as a music room, it being large enough to have this grand piano in it. Though difficult for us to believe, people ate in the dining room. People always ask me, they come up and they go, I don't know what to do with my dining room. We don't use it. And I kind of go, why? Is there a force field around it? But having dinner together was considered to be a very important part of family life. Now, they did have breakfast nooks in the kitchen, and sometimes breakfast, lunch, or tea would take place there, but dinner was always eaten in the dining room. And usually dining rooms shared similar decor with the living room, lots of woodwork, often a wainscoting topped with a plate rail, like they have here, and of course the built-in china cabinet or sideboard. Here's another sideboard. This is also in Seattle. This one has, again, your fake pegged through tenants. And some lovely art glass in the doors down below. And it also has a kind of interesting gray finish on it, which you didn't see as often as just the clear finish, but sometimes there was either a gray or a green. It was actually colored shellac that they would use on the interior woodwork. Bungalow kitchens were the first modern kitchens. They contained things we still have in kitchens in the 21st century: a sink, a stove, a refrigerator, cabinets, and workspaces. The kitchen was the most complex room in a bungalow. It is still the most complex room in a modern house. But in the bungalow, it was a workroom, a utilitarian space, rather than the central place in the home that it has become in this century. Nonetheless, they're relatively functional even by our standards compared to, what had come before them. This is a kitchen. This is in the same Julia Morgan bungalow in Berkeley, completely redone by my extremely obsessive friend Mark, who put in a vintage tiled-in refrigerator. The inside of this is tiled. It has a separate compressor down in the basement, wire shelves, the whole 9 yards. The stove, I'm losing battery power here. The stove is from 1926. He's got reproduction light fixtures of the kind you would have had, the bare light bulb on a string. Really did quite a nice job on it. Here's another bungalow kitchen. This is at the Bennett Ranch, which is a house museum in a town called Lake Forest, just north of San Diego. Got your whole wall o' cupboards, which is kind of nice, including the 2 flower bins down at the end and a whole lot of other storage. A monitor top refrigerator. They were introduced about 1927, advertised as holding a huge 7 cubic feet. But they are practically indestructible, so many of them are actually still running. Indoor plumbing, of course, is the very basis of modern civilization, and likely the one thing about it most of us would not be willing to give up. Conveniently, plumbing was pretty much perfected in the 19th century, and the bathroom in a bungalow is still entirely functional even by our standards. At the time, the key words in bathrooms, as well as kitchens, were sanitary, white, and clean. They were very germ-phobic, having just discovered germs fairly recently. This is a bathroom at the Reardon Mansion in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is a house museum. And you can see it's all white and sanitary. Got the battleship linoleum floor, your clawfoot tub, everything's painted with white enamel. Strange little light fixtures, strange little table, actually. Maybe that was a changing table, very early changing table. Later on in the 20s, colored tile and fixtures started to appear after someone realized that germs were colorblind. So this is in a Craftsman house in Hollywood. This bathroom was actually remodeled in the 1920s with 1920s tile, and behind those 2 arches in the wall, there is actually a sunken shower. Go down about 6 steps and you're in the shower. The bedrooms were for sleeping, so everything was designed to be calm and soothing. Sometimes the bedroom woodwork was also left natural, but often it was painted, even if the formal rooms were not painted. Usually the wall colors were a little more delicate, a little more pastel in the bedrooms. So this is in a bungalow in Seattle. Lovely sort of mottle green on the walls, really nice applique vintage quilt on the bed. This is back to the Julia Morgan. This is the bedroom. It's very, very dark. I have to tell people sometimes, oh, you just have to embrace the darkness. But again, it's still got the original linen wall covering. This was way cool. This is also at the Craftsman in Hollywood, and this is the sleeping porch, and it was sort of a wraparound sleeping porch, and these are the Murphy beds. There were 5 of them. So you pull them down, they sit on these little brackets. It was too cool. Now, if you had a 1.5-story bungalow as opposed to just 1 story, then you did probably have a stairway, which often came out of, the front hall, the living room, the dining room, to go up to the 2nd floor. And so usually they kind of tried to make it into an architectural feature of the room. Open floor plans made the bungalow's small size seem larger, and built-ins not only saved floor space, but it meant the new owners didn't have to purchase furniture. So this Seattle bungalow has like even more bookcases than normal. There's another one over here, which you can't see. And of course, you know, because of the worship of the fireplace, you might need to have an ingle nook, which is a, you know, a little nook around the fireplace where you could go and sit and keep warm or watch the fire. So many bungalows had these. And if you did have some kind of second floor in a 1.5-story bungalow, then you could make it into bedrooms or what have you, as has been done here. A lot of bungalows were built with the second floor unfinished so that you could finish it off later when you needed more space, you know, like you had more kids or whatever. And of course, there was always a built-in in the dining room. This one actually takes up the entire wall. This is a Chicago bungalow, and they're kind of a thing all unto themselves because they weren't built until the 20s, most of them. They have a lot of prairie-style influence. There are like 80,000 of them in what is called the bungalow belt around downtown Chicago. And as you can see in the slide, they were built really, really close together. And they kind of gave up the big front porch for a big bay-windowed sunroom in the front. And again, they had the second floor, so they had a dormer and a stairway so that you could eventually make that into living space if you wanted to. They're always brick, almost always. And they're not like bungalows elsewhere. Elsewhere, however, bungalows are in danger. Historic buildings continued to be pulled down in the name of progress. In every town, there are and have been property owners, developers, city councils, colleges, and businesses perfectly willing to demolish one bungalow or 100 in the name of progress. Not many people would be willing to defend a bungalow as rundown as this one. This is in Vancouver, BC. Many people can't look beyond peeling paint or overgrown yards. But isn't this kind of a cool bungalow? I mean, look at this weird tower and this dormer which doesn't have a window in it and these really bulbous columns. It's just really kind of an interesting house. The bungalows I've showed you so far have been preserved. They were not bulldozed to make way for parking lots or office buildings or strip malls or mini mansions. They did not have their historic fabric removed in order to install the latest fad in decor or architecture, or if they did, someone took the trouble to restore them back to what they were supposed to be. Until now, the mainstream preservation movement has mainly concerned itself with what could be termed trophy buildings. City halls, courthouses, mansions, historic theaters, hotels, houses by famous architects, etc. All are eminently worth preserving, of course, like the Gamble House in Pasadena, shown here. But while those buildings were being fought for, thousands of modest buildings were lost to the wrecking ball and continue to be lost. Few people have stepped up to defend bungalows, working-class Victorians, historic gas stations, small commercial buildings, old warehouses, and other modest buildings, and now they are gone. Like this. This was the Wednesday afternoon clubhouse in Alhambra, California, which I found randomly in a magazine and went, oh my God, that looks like my house. That is so cool. So I immediately went looking for, preservationists in Alhambra to see if I could find out if it was still there. And of course it's not. It was torn down in the 60s. Progress, What is really cool about this postcard, though, is if you look down just to the right of the tree, you will see that they have a little model of it, which I guess they were, keeping around until they got the real thing built. So these modest buildings represent the history of ordinary people who built them and worked in them and lived in them, and that is the real history, not the history of wars and politicians and great events. We are told this is the price of progress. It isn't. Russell Baker said, usually, things that are done with the excuse that progress requires them are not really progress at all, but just terrible things. We can no longer afford to throw away the now irreplaceable materials and craftsmanship that went into old buildings. To do so is an affront to the labor and artistry of those who built them. The tiniest bungalow contains several hundred board feet of old-growth timber. It is an insult to the trees that gave their lives to send that wood splintered and useless to a landfill. Here's some old-growth timber that survived. This is my entry hall. The man who built my house owned a lumber yard. He went a little nuts. So these are solid 10 by 10 beams holding up the second floor. There are 45 of these blocks just in the entry hall. I have not counted up the rest of them. They're all over the first floor of the house. In any case, the destruction of historic buildings robs us all of something important. It is theft, pure and simple. It may be disguised with lofty pronouncements about bettering the community or that it will achieve some praiseworthy goal, but it is still theft. Okay, end of preachy part. Now we're going back to bungalows are cool. So this is my house being built. I just got this slide and I'm very excited about it. And you can see why we call it the Bunga Mansion. I'm particularly excited because I used to wonder what the fence was like. Now I know. And there it is today. There are those who deem the arts and crafts movement, both in Britain and America, to have been a failure. A recurring joke in the arts and crafts revival is that we have now lasted longer than the original movement. Bungalows have become popular again because they still work for our present lives, and unlike modern houses with 3-inch baseboards and spray-textured sheetrock, bungalows are solidly built using materials of a quality that you can't get anymore except if you're very wealthy. For the bungalow that is the very symbol of British colonialism to have become the icon of a progressive design movement in America is ironic, to say the least. Nonetheless, we took the form and made it our own and made it a symbol of democratic values and artistic ideals. Now, I don't know about the artistic ideals of this bungalow, but it sure do have a lot of clinker brick. And I especially like that it has essentially a porte cochere for the walkway. Not for the car, just for the walkway. Here's another Chicago bungalow in a different color of brick. They all have these, you gotta like this, you know? This is the basement window, and yet someone has gone to the trouble to make it an arch. This is a Sears bungalow, which you could get for $15.77. Side gabled with a dormer was the most popular style nationwide. Least popular style, prairie style. A little too modern for most people, I guess. These are some new bungalows. I usually cringe when people go, oh, I want to show you the new bungalows. It's like, oh, God. But these are in Memphis, and they're actually not half bad. I don't really believe in new bungalows. I believe there should be no new ones until, you know, all the old ones are fixed. So I'm getting the time thing, so. We're going to skip ahead to just the amusing stuff. In some ways, the arts and crafts revival has succeeded even as the original movement did, because arts and crafts has become popular as a style. But of course, in popular culture, the philosophy has gone by the wayside. I think real success will come when we find a way to get the philosophy back into it. One thing I think we could do is to wrest the word craft back into respectability. Because now if you tell people that you're interested in arts and crafts, they go, oh, you mean like scrapbooking? No. So arts and crafts is kind of a paradox, and my own paradox is that at odds with my arts and crafts belief is my great love for all things tacky. Maybe a love of beauty just has to be balanced by a love of the surpassingly hideous. Maybe it's like the Zen koan, not actually solvable, but I've come up with my own theory regarding art, architecture, and design, which, if not resolving the paradox, at least gives me a structure to allow for all sides of it. And my theory is this: everything must be either beautiful or amusing. Some things can be both at once. Like this bungalow in Memphis, which's got just the biggest honking pillars I have ever seen. Or this little number in Milwaukee with your kind of Spanish mission-style gables, and I'm pretty sure there weren't any Spanish missions within thousands of miles of Milwaukee. Here's a kind of Asian-influenced bungalow in Denver, very Japanese with the way this comes up through the cornice. Here's another bungalow in Milwaukee. You can see more of, there's a lot of prairie-style influence there as well. This was cool. The log bungalow with structural log, brackets. Unfortunately, painted white on the ends, not really good, and unfortunately terribly run down. I hope that someone will buy this someday and restore it. This is the 10,000 square foot arts and crafts house in Hollywood. It's, at the head of a canyon, so it's actually 4 stories high. Under this porch, there is a ballroom. The interesting thing is, very arts and crafts on the outside. Here's the dining room, like an English baronial hall. Here's another bungalow in Memphis with, more amusing pillars. So I want to end with my favorite Zen joke. What did the Buddha say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. Thank you.
Now it's off to the awards. Let me get this thing up a little bit. We'll go through each award. The people receiving it, please come on up and accept your award. And if you'd like, you're welcome to come over here. We've got a few slides of each one. You're welcome to make a few comments, talk about some of the work you've done, or just run back to your chair if you prefer that. So in the category of public and private organizations, restoration and rehabilitation, the 9 Mile Community Church Committee, Sue Stanley, Carolyn Demon, Sue Matthews, and Neighbors, Middle 9 Mile Road, Missoula. A few shots.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. This is the bell for the church. This part of the history of this bell, it was actually brought from Fort Benton on a flat boat and then carried cross-country in a wagon. Do you have the next one? This is our building in the new location. This is at the 9 Mile Community Center grounds. We've got the new foundation, the new roof, the new stairs, and now we're working on the landscaping in the interior. This is a before picture. This is the bell and the building at its previous location. And you can see there's been a lot of work done. There it is again, the previous location. This is the interior. These windows were actually, each block historically was donated to the church. These buildings used to be a warehouse at a gold mine up in the top of 9 Mile, and the community pulled together in 1949 to make this into a church. These blocks were donated in each family's name, and that was how they did the windows. And that's it again at the new site. And that's the main anchor of our complex. That's the 9 Mile Community Center. That used to be the Stark School, and that's also on the Historic Register. It's a shot from the back of the community center. Thank you.
Thank you. So in public and private organizations, renovation and rehabilitation, the windows, the granite steps, and the greenhouse for the U.S. General Services Administration, Mike Rutter. Show you a few shots. It's a fabulous building. So nice to have downtown. It's just great to see them. We're so happy for the work that you guys did on it. Thank you. Oh, love that park. I always quiz my students. In my architectural history class, I send them on field trips for architectural details. There's always 2 or 3 in this building they got to find. Cynthia?
I want to add, I'm sorry, this isn't Mike Rutter, you're Mike's boss, I believe.
I'm the actual, actually, I'm out in the office. Sitting next to Mike Rutter. Mike Rutter,
You all the way over. Yeah, family. I nominated this building, I've worked in this building for like 100 years.
Cynthia, do you want to talk about it for a second?
Well, I think we can hear it. And I just wanted to say thank you very much. The buildings were really bad in the federal building, the condition, and instead of taking them out, putting in some icky aluminum something type of window that we often see, they chose instead to put in, if you care to elaborate, that would be wonderful, but a very energy efficient window. And if you're inside the building, you think you have the exact same mahogany mahogany window frames. You did take out the first floor, were all taken out and very carefully restored and put back in, and then the ones on the second and third story were manufactured, and you cannot tell that they are brand new windows. They just look so beautiful.
I didn't actually physically work on this project myself, but I know that there were a lot of challenges for safety and health issues with the lead paint that was involved with it. And using some, more modern practices, we were able to replace or restore a lot of the windows in safe ways and preserve its integrity.
Windows were boarded up on the first floor. They were taken out, maybe a couple at a time. Maybe, I'm not sure how many, 3 or 4 at a time, and then put back in. But they would be out for months at a time. That's how much work was done to each of those on the first floor. And it was a really expensive project, but a really one that's really going to help maintain the integrity and beauty of that building. And I'm not sure about what else. I know the granite steps, but when I nominated, I hadn't nominated that part because they weren't really done yet. So I don't know much about the steps, but they are beautiful. So thank you very much, Juicy.
Thank you.
In the category Public and Private Organizations, Renovation and Rehabilitation, the Roxy, 718 South Higgins, home of the International Wildlife Film Festival Media Center, Janet Rose, Executive Director, Tim Skufka, did I get that right? And Mike Madden.
Thank you.
If you want.
Janet had to leave, but she said give regards and she appreciates the honors. I just got involved because I saw an article in the Missoulian that they got an award to work on extend the authenticity of the Roxy, and I said, I called the Roxy, and Janet took the phone, and the two of us got together and came up with some ideas, and then the actual come to fruition was brought to us and built by Mike Madden. So it was a team effort, and we got through it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a shot of it before they extended out the process shots. Okay, public and private organizations, restoration. The Western Montana Mental Health Center, 1910 Fort Missoula Road. The exterior improvements and roof restoration, Paul Meyer and Patty Kent.
I'd like to say a few things about this beautiful old building. We didn't quite know what we were getting into when we knew we needed to re-roof. We'd had leakage problems, and we did the responsible thing, got half a dozen bids from different vendors, some of whom proposed metal roof replacement, some of whom wanted to replace all the tiles. We ended up selecting an individual, a local roofer, Gus's Roofing, who said, you know, I've worked with tile roofs before, and I think we can salvage some of the existing tiles there. He says, I don't know how much of it we'll be able to salvage because some of it had clearly been damaged. The roof is almost 100 years old, and we knew we had pretty extensive roof repairs to do. He said, but let's see if we can take the tiles off carefully. We'll take them down, we'll clean them up, and we'll see what we can put back on. And we were able to salvage about 80% of the tiles and reuse them. And as we compared the old tiles with the new ones we could have bought, we found the quality of the 100-year-old tiles was better than what we could buy today being manufactured. So with a donation from the Forest Service, who had some extra tiles around, we were able to redo the whole job, and it's really delightful. And I think given that we had 100 years to look at where the wear and tear had occurred in the past, we were able to do the best quality underlayment we could, and where we needed flashing to protect the building for the next 100, maybe 150 years. So pretty neat project. My wife said, be sure to remind them that every time we got in the car last summer, you'd take my mother and myself and down there, and we'd have to go and see what they did today. We'd have to drive around and check the progress. But really very neat, and it is probably good for another 100 years. It's amazing how well they built the tiles back in 1910 when they did it originally. So thank you very much for the award.
And I might add that this building last year was listed as one of the 11 endangered buildings with Preserve Historic Missoula, and we have always been concerned about it, and now it's been taken off the list. So that's a real good thing.
Public and private organizations, restoration, Farviews, Patty Canyon Neighborhood, Council Whitaker Park, Ray Atten, James Horton, Missoula Parks and Recreation, Donna Gockler. Are they here?
I got an email from Ray Otten, and he couldn't be here, but I'll share one little story with you. I taught kids photography in this building in 1978 for the Parks Department, and this was a communications center for the Forest Service. Fire lookouts were hardwired to this building, and there's a switchboard in the basement of this, or at least there was in 1978, where all of the phone lines were hooked in directly, and when somebody called in a fire, it went out from there to the fire crews on the Lola Forest. And so it's now a community project, and that's one of the good adaptive reuses of, you know, historic little buildings that when you go by it next time, you'll know a little bit more about it.
For individual contributions, Missoula County, Bill and Ramona Holt, the Holt Heritage Museum, Travelers Rest, Lolo. Come on up.
Thank you very, very much. Ramona and I are quite honored when you have your neighbors and your friends and your peers that have noticed what you do. We appreciate it. I don't know just what pictures I have here, but this is the entrance to our ranch. And you go ahead and click them. And this is our Holt Heritage Museum. This is our personal museum. We are really not open to the public, but we would like every one of you or whoever can, and we do have a lot of activities out there, to call us, come out, and we will greet you very readily and show you the museum. The museum is a collection of things that Ramona and I have collected over the years that we felt that we had to have a show place for, so we built it. And part of it was part of a barn. Now, I've got to look, we have two different museums, and this is our Heritage Museum. This is our own personal collection that you'll be able to see. We spent 40 years in professional rodeo, and this encompasses the Hall of Fame and the legends of rodeo, and some of the old and some of the new of what rodeo was. This now is another show window that contains the Indian artifacts that we have. You're actually getting a teaser of what our personal museum is. And at some time, do come out and see these things. They'll mean more to you. These are pretty rare things. This is very modern. This is our last acquisition. This is a carriage. A lot of people will relate to it as Cinderella's carriage. This is called a Vis-a-Vis. There are not very many of these around. It's the only carriage that's ever been made that resembles a stagecoach. The stagecoach and this have the same seating style. In other words, you're facing each other. All of the rest of the carriages do not have that. Now we're over into the museum that Travelers Rest is going to have. Ramona and I felt that we wanted to leave something because of our collection. So you're going too fast here with me. Let's go back. Okay. This is one of the pieces. Now, the Lolo Travelers Rest Museum. It's not the Lolo. It's the Travelers Rest Museum, and it'll be in the Travelers Rest Park. And it'll be open, I would say, Ramona would really know more than I, but about the 1st of July. 1st of July, and it will be open to the public, and it will be staffed. We built we wanted to leave something for Lolo because the park is on our land. And so this is going to go to Travelers Rest. This is part of the Old Town. We actually have a main street of an old town in the museum. Where did that come from? I was on the Historical Society trustees for 20 years. We used to have, and all of you people, how many of you people remember when we had the main street of an old town downstairs in the museum of the Historical Society? Well, I see a few hands. Well, that has never ever left me because we had to abandon it for room for other things. And so we've now built a main street in our museum, and what you're looking at here is a little touch of Lonesome Dove. You remember the movie, and there's a bar on this end of it where I'm standing would be the bar, and a slab bar, that's a poker table, and then we have a bordello. Yes, we are showing the younger generation what a bordello was. You got to remember that was the first starting of our educational systems, and like it or not, we're going to make them leave it. That's what the beads are there. That's what that is. This is going into the entryway of Travelers Rest. And of course, Travelers Rest parking lot is on our land. Then they have a bridge. How many of you have been to Travelers Rest? Oh, well, you all know what I'm talking about then. The Travelers Rest, then that's the road going in. And then we will have the fence down, and then you'll be able to go over to the museum. There we are. And we want to say thank you so much to all of you that are, this is a wonderful thing that you've done for noticing and observing people, being on the Historical Society. I've been associated with what you've done. We've given awards over in Helena, but you're just a wonderful group of people, and Ramona and I thank you very much.
The last slide you saw was the yurt at Travelers Rest, which that is what they're using presently as their visitor center. And the building that we have built is 10,000 square feet, including the museum, an educational area, kitchen, restrooms. Like the volunteers say, oh, we have flush toilets. Which will be wonderful for them. But Bill and I traveled rodeo for 40 years. In our private museum, that's what you see is the rodeo memorabilia and the Native American memorabilia that we've been able to pick up during that time. Also, things that we've restored are two of the oldest houses on Lola Creek. They were both built before the turn of the century, before 1900, 1896, both of them. And now we did those in the 70s is when we restored them. And now we have a son and daughter-in-law that lives in one of them, and they have changed it a bit, but they have not changed the integrity of that home. So it kind of runs in the family that we like to restore, retain, and collect so that the next generation will be able to love it like we have. And thank you for the award. We really appreciate it.
And I know that the Holts are too shy to say this, but they received the Governor's Award for tourism, I believe, just this year. And so this is that.
So now we have award for commercial stewardship. The Missoulian Saving Stoverood's Clock, 111 North Higgins, Stacy Mueller, Sherry Devlin, and ALPS.
So I brought this satchel with me to show you the people who really deserve to get this award. And inside here are all of the hundreds and hundreds of letters that came from the people in Missoula who paid for purchasing the Stoverood's clock. They spent $5, $10, sometimes a single dollar bill, every time in a little envelope, oftentimes with a note or a little sticky pad that said, sometimes a memory that they had of cruising downtown in high school and the clock told them when they needed to get home. Or you know, a couple of sisters in Darby who said they just enjoy coming to Missoula, and they always think of downtown Missoula as that clock. So really what this is a tribute to all of the people of Missoula who joined together a little bit at a time and within a very few days to come up with the money that we needed to preserve that clock downtown. So thanks to all of you.
Award for residential stewardship, Richard and Mary Barnhart, 802 and 804 Monroe Street, Jay Kern and Ray Huff.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Want to make a comment or two on it?
I might as well.
Please do.
Well, I'm a painter, first of all, not a talker, so I'm kind of nervous. But I know Mary would like to be in here, and I know she'd like you guys to honor in this house because she's really sick with pancreatic cancer, and she loves this house. And she went to a lot of expense putting this house back together the way it was. And I can just tell you, folks, that it took a lot of work, and she put everything back to what it was originally. All the wood windows were done. As the lady was talking, all the wood windows were done the way they were supposed to be done. Everything in this home is the way it was when that house was built in, I think, 1902. We've seen newspapers in there that showed the beginning of World War II, Japan, the ending of World War II, the ending of Japan. But I can just tell you that was a really hard home to paint, but it was a really nice home to paint. And Mary had her own way of doing that. There's 2 coats of enamel, hard enamel paint on that house. And it wasn't easy because of the rock and the brick. That's where you had most of your fine stuff. And I just think there should be more said about that house because, like most people, these homes aren't getting the recognition they should have. And if you ever went inside that house, it's a really nice home. It's got all the wood in it and stuff. In fact, one of the kids that worked for me who's in back there right now, he thinks it's haunted. But anyway, I just want you to know it's a really nice home, and I want to thank you, and I'm going to send this to Mary. And I just want to say thank you for her. I'm not good at this, you guys.
My name's Margie Jacobs, and I was Mary's growing up across the street best friend, and I didn't know they were going to get in touch with Jay. I knew they were trying, and how much they appreciated what work you were willing to do, because finding a craftsman to do the work that you did is difficult, as any of you know who have done restoration. But as he said, Mary loves this house, and the reason that they have kept it is because it was her family home. And I think to those of you that care about historic preservation, you'll love knowing that she says, this home will always be mine because it was my family home. She intends to keep it, even though she now lives on Long Island in New York. So it makes it a long-distance project. And she's raised a son who now says, I'm going to keep that home too, even though he's never lived in Missoula. And Mary wanted me to tell you that when her father wanted to buy this house in the mid-1930s, when he had proposed to her mother and was looking for a place for them to live, Ruth Greeno Mosby was not in a mood to sell any Greeno property. And the reason she sold it to him was because he had been a friend of the Greeno's son who died when he was in high school. And so she sold it to Harry Hughes. And he did lower the ceilings inside in order to entice Mary Gilbert to marry him. And so that's just about all that was changed inside. The ceilings are lowered, but other than that, the floor plan is just the same as it was when it was built. So I can't tell you how excited she is to get this award. Thank you.
And now we're very pleased to give the Dorothy Ogg Historic Preservation Award. Dorothy was a longtime preservation activist in town. She was on the commission for, I don't know, forever, seemed like. And so this award is in her honor, and we're honored to present it to Judy Matson.
The Bonner roots run deep, right?
Yes.
It's kind of late. You can just go ahead and flip through these. I actually only have 10 pages here because I wanted to keep it short tonight, but I am going to even cut this down, even though I knew I couldn't leave any of these things out. But in 1976, Gladys Peterson and Jim Peterson, who many of you probably know, Gladys is a teacher at Bonner School, and we had a bicentennial project. Patients telling me to slow down, but I'm so nervous, to do a local history. And that book and the pictures that Jack L. Demmons collected in conjunction with it have been the bulwark of all Bonner history and all of the things that have happened out there. So I am just like floored to get an award like this because so many people have given so much to Bonner. And so I just feel that maybe in some small way I can just represent all these people. Anyway, we had the history book, we had the pictures. The pictures were actually about 1,600 photographs, which were collected from the late 1800s to the 1950s. And they were each individually glued about 8 or 9 to a sheet on these big cardboard sheets. And the old timers would come every year. There used to be a party for them. And over the years, the old timers faded away, and the pictures were fading away as well. When Kim Brigham discovered them, stacked 200 poster boards full of these historic pictures stacked in the custodian's office at Bonner School. And so he started taking them a couple boards at a time home, and he was doing the cataloging and indexing of these pictures, the first time it had ever been done. And so he then introduced the problem that these irreplaceable historic artifacts were being stored in the custodian's room. The custodian's taking great care of them, but so now Doug Guardiana was the new superintendent. He listened to what Kim had to say, and he made a storage facility for them in the school library. So this, I feel, living out at Bonner, the place where two rivers are coming together, is a confluence of our community members who are rooted in their past. Then in 1982, some of us are very familiar with the fact that arsenic was discovered in the drinking water out at Milltown. And we got a new word in our vocabulary then. It was called Superfund. And years of study followed, and the decision to leave the Milltown Dam in place was just about to happen, and Mother Nature put in her voice, which was to create a huge ice jam which threatened the dam and scoured up toxic sediment, sending them downstream, killing fish, wreaking havoc on aquatic wildlife and life. And so instead of keeping the dam in place as had been planned, the decision was made to drain the reservoir, remove 2.6 million cubic tons of contaminated sediments, and remove Milltown Dam itself. So this is a big change for our community. And as a result of EPA's coming into our community, Diana Hammer, who is one of the real champions of saving Bonner history, was the EPA outreach coordinator, the community coordinator. She lives in Helena. She's not here tonight, but she's made so many trips here. And on her behalf, the county commissioners got a grant to form a working group, the Milltown Redevelopment Working Group out in Milltown, Bonner. And it had 24 citizens, half from the community, half river stakeholders or county citizens, who were charged with, well, how will we redevelop this area once the cleanup is taken place and once the rivers are restored from their reservoir state to their free-flowing state, which they are almost have achieved by now. And so this working group was formed. The membership was chosen by the commissioners through application process. And we split up into committees, and there was a couple of people named Judy Matson and Mike Custodia signed up for the History and Culture Committee. This committee was aided, as was the entire working group, by Peter Nielsen, who the county appointed to be our liaison between the county and the working group. So here we were, History and Culture Committee. So just to tell you kind of what the scope of our work was, Mike, who is a very fine writer, and I've kind of ruined some of what he said here because it didn't fit exactly what I wanted to say, but sorry, Mike. But he wrote this summary for the county commissioners. We see in the confluence of two rivers, the Blackfoot and Clark Fork, the remarkable story of a place. Actually, it's a set of stories, beginning with a dam coming down, the last ice dam that unleashed glacial Lake Missoula's floods, and concluded more than 10,000 years later with the removal of another, the Milltown Dam, and the restoration of two rivers. We see in the confluence of two rivers, the Blackfoot and Clark Fork, the remarkable story of a landscape, then that of the native peoples, Meriwether Lewis' journey on July 4th, 1806, the John Mullen winter encampment in 1861 and 62, the mills and their legacy, the immigrants and their communities, and culminating with the Clark Fork cleanup and restoration, a confluence of stories related to place. So there we were, 10,000 years of history to preserve. So we sent out an invitation to every historical museum, art museum, archives, the Historical Preservation Commission, and every historian in the area that we could think of asking for help. And they all responded. Month after month, they would come to meetings to help instruct us, guide us, and get us going again when we got discouraged or things kind of got unpleasant at home. And many, and in particular Philip Meckling, Cynthia Manick, and Diane Sands, helped us to identify and preserve the artifacts and to help show us how to make history come alive for the people in our community who were pretty shell-shocked by all the things that were happening. So things began to look pretty good. We actually were able to make some things checked off on our list. With historic mitigation money, always helpful for the Superfund settlement, the Demons photos were scanned and digitally preserved, and they're owned jointly by Bonner School and the UM archives now. And that paved the way for reprinting the long out-of-print history book that I alluded to at the beginning. And we discovered a huge friend of Bonner. Her name is Miney Smith, and she was so wonderful all the way through, but she actually told us, you don't, Kim Brigham and I had this dream for a long time of making this book come back to life. She said, you know, you don't really have to type that over yourselves. You can scan these pages into editable text. And then she did it, and it was so awesome. And then, in addition to that, she located all of the pictures that were in the original book, and some of them were not in the Demons collection, and she would just walk around here and there in the Bonner Library or up at McNamara's Landing and say, that's one of the pictures from the book, and she'd get it and she'd bring it back home, and so we had that. And then she also enhanced and increased the index of that book, and so she, another friend of Bonner. Other successes that we had were all of the major equipment and the features of the powerhouse were secured, again, in large measure to Philip and Peter and Diana Hammer. We had our original dream of building a wonderful interpretive center there, and I really appreciate the Holt's efforts in having their museum because it's not easy to do. So that dream is on hold for now, but we're going the digital route, so we're making it a virtual interpretive center. And again, Mike stepped forward with his writing skills, got a grant, and even offered to set up the website. So in the near future, you will be able to log on to rivershistory.net. So we had a confluence of historic preservationists. So things were looking pretty good. Unfortunately, the Bonner houses were in disrepair, and they were just about ready to fall over. There happened to be a guy from the Rattlesnake named Scott Cooney who appeared out of thin air, apparently, and bought them and is restoring them. He then brought to town a person named Dan Hall, whom you may know, and they have prepared the nomination papers to establish the Bonner Company Town Historic District for the National Historic Register. He also hired Patience Woodall, and if there was ever a spark plug, it's Patience, and she's always there to reignite our flagging energy. She's got enough to spare for everybody. So with the help of Scott and Patience, the Bonner houses have been accessible to the public again, and history can be relived in some of these pictures that you've seen behind me. For example, A.B. Hammond came to a Friends of Two Rivers Christmas party that was held in one of the houses. He and his wife, who do really resemble Dale and Johnson and his wife, you might have noticed. So we're having a lot of fun with the history these days. The Friends of Two Rivers has been totally supportive of everything, all the historic projects we've done. And tonight I'd like to thank Chuck and Mary Erickson and Gary Matson, who are here as founders of that organization. Monthly history conversations began, which were an outpouring of individual citizens who came forward and wanted to keep the history alive. And they formed the Bonner Area History Roundtable. So we have a confluence of energy now. Well, the Stimson Mill closed, and that ended the tenure of the longest continuous operating mill in the country. The mill yard is silent, and a century of stories is in those empty buildings. So with the nurturing and tutoring of the past 6 years that we've gotten from all the historic preservationists in the community, we're ready to take this challenge on. And again, Miney has stepped forward to help lead the Bonner Area History Roundtable, and a local person, Jim Willis, has helped tremendously in reaching out to mill workers. We've had several, a series on mill history, which is just the beginning of collecting that history from the perspective of the workers. And maybe someday the mill will be open again, and it'll have new green industries, and another generation of workers will be living in Bonner and going over there to work. We hope so. So we'll have a confluence of hope. Kim Brigham wrote the foreword to the third printing of Grassroots Tribute, and I'd like to quote a little bit of what he said. These past few years have seen tremendous changes in Bonner, and who's to know what an updated history of the community will read like a decade from now. All we know is what has already happened. And Norman McLean, who wrote about the Blackfoot River, where we're situated, eventually all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. So thank you. I am totally honored to accept this on behalf of all the individuals in Bonner who have made it live.
Well, thank you all very, very much for coming. It's always a joy and a pleasure to honor all the preservation efforts that happen as we all keep getting reminded by tonight's activities and other things. The preservation in the community doesn't really start up high. It starts locally, and it succeeds locally, and it's because of all the work that you guys are doing that makes it so exciting, and we really deeply, deeply appreciate all your work. Philip, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to thank all of you for coming. And I would like to have members of Preserve Historic Missoula and members of the Historic Preservation Commission stand up just for a minute, so you know who some of those people are, or wave if you're already standing. And the alcoholic beverages were provided by Preserve Historic Missoula, so you can thank them. And donations are welcome. Thanks a lot.